I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Bernard Muller was a successful businessman in the maritime and oil industry, but when he was diagnosed with the neurodegenerative disease ALS in 2010, he turned his entrepreneurial skills toward developing new therapies to treat the disease. Muller co-founded the world's largest genetic research project for ALS, Project Mine, and launched Treeway, a biotech company developing new therapies for ALS. As the Biotechnology Industry Organization kicks off its Bio 2015 International Convention in Philadelphia June 15th, Muller is a finalist as one of the organization's everyday superheroes in the pharma biotech category. We spoke to Muller about his decision to launch Treeway, the active role he sees for patients, and why he thinks traditional approaches to drug development and clinical trial designs have not served ALS patients well. Bernard, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. You're very welcome.
We're going to talk about your efforts to combat ALS, but before we talk about that and the circumstances that led you there, perhaps we can start with the disease itself. I think people have a vague awareness that it involves something with dumping buckets of ice on your head these days, but for those listeners who may not be familiar with what ALS is, tell us what it is, how it manifests itself, and what's its progression and diagnosis.
Well, ALS is a disease that robs you from the ability to speak and to move slowly. It starts in your either in your hands or your feet, or it affects your speech. And the diagnosis is terribly poor. I mean, the forecast that normally you get from your neurologist is about 3 to 5 years to live, and you end up almost completely paralyzed because the signals from your nerve cells don't end up at your muscles anymore. So your muscles are wasting very slowly throughout the course of the disease.
Well, how well understood is the cause of the disease, and what treatment options exist today?
Well, that's even more poor. I mean, if you look at the options you have with ALS, there are actually no options. There's one approved drug on the market that has been invented already 20 years ago, that only slows down the disease, according to the publications, with only 3 months. It's a very old drug, and the patients throughout the world take it because there's nothing else, but there are actually no options, and also the course of the disease and the disease itself, the cause is unknown. So it's a very terrible, complex disease where, the scientists are still breaking their heads upon the finding a cause.
At the same time, you've said that the traditional approaches to drug development and clinical trials has not served ALS patients well. Why is that?
Well, I think it has a couple of reasons. One is, of course, lack of money. I mean, it's a disease that is called a rare disease, although it's not completely a rare disease. If you look at the chance you have to develop ALS in your life is almost similar to multiple sclerosis. Only the outlook for the disease is much shorter. So at any time in time, the number of patients are limited. And in early days, nowadays, there's more focus on rare diseases from from the pharmaceutical world and also from the biotech companies. But in the past 20 years, that wasn't. So lucky for rare disease field, there's now more focus and there's also more funding, that's where the patient community last year was, of course, were very much surprised as anyone did with the social phenomenon like the ice bucket challenge. But if you look into research funding into a disease field, 100 million is a lot of money, but we need a lot more.
Well, you refer to yourself as a patient 3.0. What does that term mean to you?
Well, patient 3.0. I mean, if I look at myself, is a patient. Normally, if you look back in time, when you were diagnosed with a rare disease, normally you listen to your doctor and they said what could be done or what can't be done, and you seek contact with other patients, just as as fellow patients to seek support with each other. And if you look into the next generation of patients, 2.0 is that patients took action. If you look into the HIV community in the early 90s, they took more into their own hands, and also in terms of funding. If you look into the cancer communities, a lot of initiatives were taken to get funding for their disease and give it to the researchers. And the third generation, what I advocate is of course not only to do research and do fundraising, but also actually develop our own drugs.
Well, it's quite remarkable. Someone given a devastating diagnosis, there are many ways you could have reacted. What do you think led you, particularly someone who spent a career in the maritime and oil industry, to take such an active role in developing a treatment for a disease?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur almost all my life since I was 20, and as an entrepreneur, you never take no for an answer. And I think the characteristic of entrepreneurship helped me to make this decision. In my other business, it's completely a different business, and I had no clue what drug development was. But I always believed if you're focused and passionate about a core, about what you drive, is that you can achieve things. And I always say in business, it's about three things. It's about money, people, and the circumstances. And money and people are mostly the same, although you need a different skill set. But a dollar is a dollar, and the circumstances are always different. And if you can set those circumstances towards, if you look into the sky, you set the stars, so to say, you can achieve a lot more than only sit back and await what researchers are doing and take your destiny in your own hands.
Well, before we talk about Treeway, the company you've launched to develop therapies for ALS, I thought maybe you could tell us a little about Project Mine, which is the largest genetic research project for ALS. What is it doing, and how far has that progressed?
Yeah, well, that was my first project after I was diagnosed, and the project itself, it's a large gene hunt. And what I reckoned when I was speaking to researchers, everyone was doing research throughout the world, but always research projects in 200 patients, in 300 patients, in 100 patients. And I was talking to researchers, and they opened this large fridge, and there were 5,000 samples of patients inside this fridge. And I told them, what are you going to do with these samples? And they say, nothing, we save them for later because it's too expensive. And what I then said is, well, we're not going to wait for later. We're going to do that now, and we're going to set up a project of 10,000 samples. That was the first initial idea. And they looked at me and they thought I was crazy. I said, do you know what this costs? And they said, yeah, I know what it costs. Because it's about $40 million. But, wow, that's never achievable. But when I was starting to learn about life science, I already knew that prices were declining of genome sequencing, and there were only 3 companies in the world that were able to do such large quantities. So what I did, I jumped into a plane and visited all these 3 companies and learned what can be done. And this was eventually evolved in Project Mine. What is now, it has evolved into 22,500 samples, 15,000 patients, and 7,500 controls. Because in research, the control patient, well, not control patients, but the controls itself are as even important as the patient data. So this is what I did, and I tried to combine and connect the dots within the research world, and spoke to research not only in my home country in the Netherlands, but also in the UK, Germany, and the US, and Australia. And it has evolved in a very large consortium, which is supported by now 15 countries, and also including all the associations and foundations of the respective countries that are involved in ALS.
Well, Treeway is not a typical biotech. How would you describe its approach, and how is that shaped by the difficulty in tackling ALS?
Well, the Treeway as a company, because when I started Project Mine, I also was thinking, what are we going to do with the results of Project Mine? How are they going to be translated into real products? And I reckon, and I visited a dozen companies, and everyone was involved in single compounds, and they weren't really attractive to me as an entrepreneur, and they weren't really disease driven. And this is what is characterized by Treeway, is that our focus is not, let's say, a technology or a compound, and we are looking to solve 5 or 10 diseases. No, we have a disease, and we are looking for technologies. And whatever that technology may be, as long as it is beneficial for the patients and it can help accelerate therapies.
Well, you've got a pipeline of drugs focused on immunology and inflammation. Well, let's start with your lead candidate, TW001, which has orphan drug designation. Where is it in the pipeline, and what's known about it at this point?
Well, the drug itself is known already for a different indication in Asia, and it has an effect on oxidative stress, which is already it is recognized as one of the main drivers within ALS as a general disease mechanism. And as long as you don't know the cause, you need to focus on general disease mechanisms. And where we are now, I mean, we are just started last Monday. We started our clinical program.
Well, you've also announced a partnership with Unicure to develop gene therapy treatment for ALS. Where is this in the clinic, and do you think such an approach may ultimately lead to a cure?
Yes. Well, our strategy is based upon 3 steps. If you look into the disease itself, to find ultimately the cause and cure or make ALS a chronic disease, we still have to find out and do a lot of research, but we at first need to start slowing down the disease. And if you look into our pipeline, the first product we just talked about is about slowing the disease a little bit. And if we look into the gene therapy itself, we are thinking that it can slow down the disease significantly, and then we need to take on to the third step.
Well, you're getting ready to kick off the Treeway Summer Challenge. Can you explain what that is and what you hope will come of it?
Well, I'm very excited. Yes, indeed. I mean, within 2 weeks we are kicking off this Treeway Summer Challenge. It's actually an idea that I had already quite a while back. If you look into publications on diseases, sometimes groups that are not generally involved in the disease are doing scientific research or explorations, so to say. If you come not within the field, if you come from outside the field and have a fresh look, you can gain a lot of insight in the disease. And the Summer Challenge, I always believe in young talent. So what we did is we recruited 8 students, and within 11 weeks we're going to give these students a lot of clinical data. And we just say to them, and we give them software. We are sponsored by Bayer and other statistical software. We just say to them, give us new insights that are not there, that are not known yet, and that are, let's say, have a fresh look at the data.
And do you think ultimately we're going to find that what we've been calling ALS is not a single disease, but possibly caused by different genetic variations?
Well, I very much doubt that. I mean, if we look at the genetics of ALS, we are just starting to explore, and we already have almost 40 genetic variations that are known that can affect or ultimately cause ALS. But I think the data itself gives us new insights in how the progression will come. I mean, a tough understanding and a very thorough understanding of the disease progression will give us better clinical trial designs. And this is what we need in ALS. We don't need large phase 3 trials. We do need very well designed phase 2 trials that are based on that are focused on efficacy, and then move onwards. If we look into the past 20 years in clinical development in ALS, well, you can see there are a lot of flaws in the design of trials.
Bernard Muller, CEO of Treeway and a Bio 2015 Biotech Everyday Superhero finalist in the Biotech Pharma category. Bernard, thanks so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice talking to you.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send an email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.